Welcome to the Discover Uncover podcast series. We hope you come away with a deeper sense of Michigan's history and how the objects and stories of the past relate to today's culture, customs, and society. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the Discover Uncover podcast series.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the Sloan Museum podcast, Discover Uncover. My name is Sarah Dickinson. I am the registrar and the exhibits liaison here at the Sloan Museum, and with me today is our curator of collections, Jeff Woodcox. Hi Jeff.
Hey Sarah, how you doing today?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm not bad. You know, it's a Monday, but
It is.
things are going okay today.
They are. You have some news for us.
So we're featuring a very special vehicle today, and the reason that we're talking about it is because here in the month of June 22nd and 23rd, we have the Sloan Museum Auto Fair coming up.
We do.
You heard about the Auto Fair?
I've heard of it.
Sloan Museum Auto Fair recently had its 50th anniversary. It's an annual auto show. It happens every single summer during the month of June, and the theme for this year's show is actually Woodies, wood-paneled vehicles.
Okay.
From all different eras. These were really popular in the 1950s, so that's one of the types of cars that are going to be featured. But, if you were to come here, you can see cars from all different kinds of eras, and some of them are going to be judged, and there'll be all kinds of events and music and food carts, so I think it's going to be a fun weekend.
Absolutely.
So, for this month's episode, we did want to feature one of the Woodies that's in our collection.
So behind us is the Woodie, yeah?
Yeah, so the actual name of this is a 1950 Buick Estate Wagon. Mm-hmm. These were not actually manufactured with wood panels, which is not something that I really realized. Okay. Buick would make these just as standard metal framed cars, and then they would get sent off to a third-party manufacturer to convert them over into wood-paneled vehicles, which I thought was really interesting.
That is interesting. Is it for aesthetic or?
So these were somewhat popular in the 1950s, although Woodies were made in other eras as well. And it is kind of an aesthetic. It's got a very unique look to it. And one of the reasons that GM didn't actually do these conversions is, it was kind of a bit of an experimental feature in some ways. And I think the calculation was kind of, do we really want to invest all of this money into doing this when we can send it off to a third party to do it?
We don't really see that anymore. Is there a reason for that, or just fall out of popularity?
I think it just kind of fell out of popularity. 1953 was actually the last year that Woodies were manufactured in the U.S. on any kind of a large scale.
Wow.
So this particular car actually has a backstory to it, which is kind of unique. Not all of the cars in our car collection have a backstory.
Yeah.
This was actually donated and owned by a man named Donald Mitchell.
Okay.
And he was the president of the Ionia Manufacturing Company. And that was actually the company that converted cars like this.
Oh, okay. So he had a little skin in the game.
Yeah, he did, a little bit. So this company was based out of Ionia, Michigan.
Oh.
And, the kind of the Lansing area.
Yeah.
Familiar with that? They started out making a lot of furniture and upholstery and things like that.
Oh, okay.
So have a lot of experience with making wooden items. So
yeah. So it makes sense that they would convert over to doing wooden car customization.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah, for sure. I would imagine there's some durability issues there, but
yeah. Do you know if it presented any safety concerns at all?
it might have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So talk to me more about the stats behind the wagon.
Sure. So this, like I mentioned, is a 1950 Buick Estate Wagon. Buick actually made 2,480 of these.
Wow.
And that not necessarily all of them were Woodies.
Okay.
But as far as the actual model, that's how many were made. And the sale price for these was about $2,800. I'm not sure if that's different once you factor in the cost of a conversion.
Right.
But you know, that's kind of the record that we have. And the interesting thing to me is to compare household income to what the cost of these vehicles were. Because it kind of helps you get an idea of, well, proportionally, how does this compare to what our cars cost today? The average household income in 1950 was about $3,300 a year. So,
oh, wow. So these were expensive.
Well, these were expensive.
Yeah.
It's most of a year's income, but I think a car is usually most of someone's, or at least half of someone's yearly income.
Right.
So brand new.
Yeah.
And at this time, you know, gas costs about 27 cents a gallon. So, you know, when you adjust for inflation, I'm not sure how all of that would translate, but
I would like to go back to 27 cents a
I
gallon.
mean, 27 cents would be pretty nice.
Yeah, slightly lower.
Yeah, so altogether, this thing weighs about 4,100 pounds.
Wow.
So, I mean, you compare that to my car today, I believe it weighs closer to the neighborhood of about 2,500 pounds.
Yeah,
so
this is heavy.
it's a big, heavy car.
It is.
You know, 1950 is actually, I think, a really exciting time in automotive history here in the United States. And one of the reasons is the automotive industry had completely shut down in 1942 as far as civilian production.
Okay.
You know, we've talked about that on previous episodes of the podcast. You know, the auto industry as a whole, including General Motors, retooled to start making war goods,
Right.
including the Hellcat tank destroyer that we talked about in another episode. And so 1946 is their first year where they start reproducing civilian vehicles again. And the 1946 designs were basically the 1942 designs carried over with some slight adjustments. And 1949 is that first year where we really see some redesigns that start happening, at least with General Motors. They're finally at a point where they can start doing that. And the kind of cool thing, I think, is over time, the manufacturing numbers start to get back up to and even exceed those pre-war levels. So manufacturing between 1949 and 1950, there was actually a 38% increase. It was over 140,000 vehicles, which is a huge amount of vehicles. A really big difference.
Yeah, especially when you consider all that went into old school manufacturing. We didn't have the machinery we do today.
Yeah, I mean, there was a human being attaching every single screw and bolt and everything else. I mean, when you're talking, you know, vertical integration, are you familiar with that term at all?
No.
So it's this manufacturing strategy wherein you don't buy your parts and supplies from other people. You buy the company that makes that part or that supply, and then it becomes a part of your operation.
Right.
So in a lot of cases, different divisions and companies owned by GM are making some of these parts and components. So when you scale it out to all of those added companies, you're talking a lot of people who are building each of these.
Yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Or at least in a different way.
Especially when you add in the layer of that wood conversion.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, you can understand why they'd need a specialized source for that it couldn't just be a car manufacturer. How is this different from taking care of like a regular metal car?
Well, you know, it gets really tricky from the perspective of a curator.
Right.
You know, we are not dealing with a time period of 5 years or 10 years, which is how long you might own a car on average.
Right.
You know, we're talking 50, 60 years, decades, centuries that we're going to have these things. In fact, this car was donated in 1969, so it's already been in our collection for, what would that be, 60 some odd years?
Yeah.
I didn't do well in high school math class.
Me either.
So
That's why we work in a museum.
yeah, that's exactly right. It's a reason I got drawn to the collection side.
Yeah.
But when you're talking that kind of a time scale, wood and metal react very differently to things like humidity. Wood is really great at just soaking up all that ambient humidity and any kind of water that's in the environment, so it's constantly expanding and contracting. And then you have the metal that's not reacting at all, mostly in size at least. It's not expanding and contracting in response to moisture. And so one of the challenges when you have these wood-bodied vehicles is the wood sometimes can crack if the environment is not super stable. So when you have those mixed materials like that up against each other touching, you've got to be really careful.
Right. So what kind of goes into caring for these cars as a whole?
Well, you know, Sloan's car collection has about 97 altogether. Mostly they focus on GM related marks or brands. Most have some kind of a Flint connection. Either they were made in Flint or there's some kind of tie to Flint. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is.
Even just keeping air in the tires and looking at oil leaks and all that. I mean, you're a part of that as well. So, I mean, you want to talk a bit about the volunteer that we have working with our car collection?
Sure, we actually have several. So we have James Drury, who has been working on helping us get an XP300 ready to go to Ohio, where it's going on loan for a couple days at a car show. He's been helping us with just like maintaining the cars, making sure that they're in good shape. We also have Kevin Stanky, who's been helping us to kind of keep the cars clean and detailed and in good shape. He lets us know if they're leaking or if they have any tire pressure issues. So they've been really crucial to helping us to care for them because we just wouldn't have the time in the day to do these things, and their expertise has been invaluable. And they're both just fantastic to work with.
So it sounds like, there's a lot that goes into caring for even the 20 or so cars that are on display here at Sloan.
There is. So in order to go on display, there's actually some rules that we have to comply with by the fire marshal, and just for safety reasons, we have to disconnect batteries. We have to make sure that the gas is only to a certain level in the tanks. We try to drain most of the fluids out of them, make sure the tire pressure is good. If we have jack stands for them, we put them on those so that, they're not sitting on their tires. Stuff like that, just trying to make sure that it's safe for people to be in a room with them in an enclosed space, and also that they're, we're caring for them as best as we can, because it is hard. They're vehicles that are meant to be running, and so there's kind of two different ways you can care for them. You can care for them like they are part of a running vehicle collection and treat them like they're meant to be moved and used, or you can treat them like a collections piece where you treat them as static objects and you don't put effort or resources towards making them run. But the two are kind of antithetical to each other. So if we were to make a car run, it would no longer function the way it should as a collections piece, and vice versa. So that's been a really interesting balance to try to find.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, can we take a closer look at the Woody?
Yeah. You
Okay.
want to jump the barrier?
Yeah, let's jump the barrier.
Now, we don't recommend that you do this
No,
if you
please
visit
don't.
Sloan Museum. All right, well, let's go across.
All right.
All right, so, on this side, you can see these wood panels that give the car its nickname, Woody.
Right.
So these would have been made of birch or ash,
Okay.
seasoned, stained. And you can see as you get close up, there is a little bit of weathering. Do you notice any of that in there?
Yeah, some warping. It looks like maybe some of the seal is starting to deteriorate. The varnish isn't really intact anymore in the way that I imagine it was.
So you can see, that's one of the challenges of having a wood-bodied vehicle is
Right.
it is a little bit more sensitive to the elements.
Yeah.
One thing that I do like to talk about with these older cars is the interior. You
Yeah.
look in there, what are the sorts of things that you see?
Right. There's no seat belts.
For one thing, there is
For
no
one,
seat
a
belts. That's
small
little
minor
different.
detail. Yeah, it's largely metal and leather. And then
Yeah, lots of very sharp edges.
yeah.
Things that if you get into a car accident, it's going to cause a lot of damage.
Right.
One of the things that a lot of older cars were known for is if you got into a front end collision, that steering wheel would get driven right into the sternum.
Right.
And so, there's a little bit of safety concerns.
Yeah, a
with
little bit.
Cars from this era.
Yeah, I imagine no ABS, no airbags. Small things, minor
things.
details.
One thing, too, with vehicles of this era, they have what are called bias ply tires. Are you familiar with
No,
that?
tell me more.
So bias ply tires, the way that they are, is it's just layers of material stacked on top of one another.
Okay.
The disadvantage of these is that they're much more prone to just kind of falling apart. The
Oh.
layers all coming apart. Today, the tires that you have
Yeah.
on the HHR, the Chevy HHR, what are called radial tires. And so these are overlapping bands of materials. It's a little bit stronger, a little bit more
Okay.
stable. So, that's one other thing with cars of this era as well.
Okay.
You want to talk a bit about why this car is placed where it is in the gallery?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what we're talking about in this section of the gallery is the influence of popular culture on
Okay.
vehicles of the time. And you think about 1950s culture, what are some of the things that you think about from that time period?
The space race, the Jetsons, rockets.
Oh, exactly right. The influence of the space race and jets on
Okay.
automotive design. One thing in particular that I want to point out is the hood ornament. It's called a gun sight,
Oh.
basically. You
Okay.
can see kind of from the appearance, but that cylindrical object right in the center of that reminds me of a rocket or a bullet. It's that very
Yeah.
streamlined, fast shape. And so that's kind of why we have this placed where it's at.
Okay.
My philosophy when I was developing this gallery was to have content that might be appealing to people who are car enthusiasts, but also maybe people who aren't car enthusiasts. And so that's why we start drawing in other topics of conversation. I also really wanted people to be able to see as many angles of the car as possible
Right.
while it was on display. So,
Yeah, the layout is what lets you put things so that people can see the side views as well.
absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some of the design elements that have really carried over into modern times from cars of this era?
One thing I want to talk about is a design that Buick is actually known for.
Sure.
And they're called ventiports or mouse holes.
Oh.
And it's these three holes that you see on either side of the hood. So these initially had kind of a practical component to them, meant for venting. You still see them on modern Buicks even today, and
Wow.
anymore it's mostly just decorative.
Oh, okay. What else?
So the front of the grille was redesigned a little bit. It's a little bit bigger and a little bit wider. You can see these vertical chrome bands on the front, the headlights and the lights on either side. And then, of course, you have the Buick logo, which is a variation of David Buick's family crest. Of course, David Buick is the founder of Buick Motor Company. So very important to have that sort of symbology on his vehicles.
Wow, okay. Well, thank you so much for talking to me about the Woody.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't get to talk to people about this kind of stuff very often, so I get real
Yeah.
excited when I have a chance to do it.
Oh, well, it was very appreciated.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up this segment, if you have a burning question for the Discover Uncover podcast, please go ahead and give us a call at 810-237-3417, or if you'd rather not have your voice on air, go ahead and email us at podcast@sloanlongway.org.